So this is Dr. Hung Chu Lin, professor of psychology. Can you tell us a bit about your education?
My education, I had my first degree was in dentistry. So I was trained as a dentist, and my specialty was in pediatric dentistry. So I practiced as a dentist, as a pediatric dentist for 10 years. And a large part of my job involved behavioral management. My training emphasized a lot not to use sedation to help kids go through dental procedures. And usually they're scary procedures. It could involve having a shot in your mouth, for anesthetic block. And then removal of teeth, for example, and sometimes surgical procedures. And so the training emphasized a lot that it's a good opportunity for kids to go through certain procedures, and then with a lot of help from the dentist and hygienist and assistant. And actually, kids could do it very well. But we worked with parents for that. And so I got the best opportunity to observe children's behavior under stress, facing scary procedures, and also parents' behaviors, their kids comply to dental procedures. And so I became very interested in behavior management and parent-child interaction and different types of response patterns in response to challenging procedures and situations. And so I became very interested in behavioral science, psychology, and so to an extent that I decided to make a career change. So it was a change, a huge change from dentistry to psychology. And because of my experience working with children, so I decided to pursue developmental psychology. So I went to University of Connecticut to get my degree. I spent 2 years in a state college, a state university in Minnesota to make up some background in psychology, to get ready for a more research-oriented program at UConn.
And who were your mentors?
My mentors, Dr. James Green, who is the department head of the psychology department right now at UConn, and also another important mentor happens to his wife, Dr. Gwen Gustafson. Both are infancy researchers.
Okay. When did you become part of the faculty of the psychology department at UL?
I came to UL in 2006. So it's been 15 years.
More than that, I think. What courses do you typically teach?
I typically teach 311 child psychology, and 455 lifespan. And Dr. McIvers and I, we take turns teaching 455, and then 534. That's a graduate course. It's called Advanced Developmental Psychology.
Tell us about your research. Is there a framework that guides the work you do?
The theoretical framework that that guides my research is called epigenetic psychobiological dynamic systems theory. It's a long name, but there's a shortened form. It's called systems thinking, systems theory, and it emphasizes how the organism and the context, the surrounding context, the developmental context, are combined into a unit. The unit of analysis is the organism, the animal or human organism surrounded by context. So organism and context as a unit. And there are different elements and systems within the organism, within the context, and they're closely connected to each other in a, not in a linear format, but rather network format. And these connections are softly assembled and they're ready to change in response to any changes in the organism or the context. And so it's a dynamic organization or connections between all the elements or systems within the organism and the context. And so it's a very dynamic and constantly changing systems, if you would. And so there's a lot of components to include into research, and the levels of analysis are multiple, and the variable of time is a vital variable to include when we describe human behavior. And so that's the theoretical framework that guides my research. And so I'm very interested in temporal courses of behavior and also the relations of behaviors, you know, how they coordinate, how they relate to each other, and how that relation changes over time.
Okay. What studies would you like to tell us about?
What studies? You mean what?
What research studies that you're doing that you'd like to talk about today?
Today. The study that I am most proud of, if you would, is a study about the temporal course of humans' responses to crying baby. So what we presented to participants was a 4 minute long cry bout. And so it's increasingly intense. It's not pleasant to listen to. And it's a stimulus that I used to elicit arousal, elicit responses. And the response, one of the responses that I'm most interested in is that the empathic response to a crying baby. So when we see a person in distress, in a unfortunate situation, very easily we would feel bad for on behalf of that person. And so there is this so-called empathic concern that would potentially occur in response to this person in distress. So a crying baby is just one of the examples, and that's a stimulus that I use often. Another aspect of response is called personal distress. And that's actually very often, that happens very often when we see another person in a unfortunate situation. So we would feel bad, and that feeling bad, not only feeling bad for that person, but actually we ourselves would experience negative emotions. Just listen to an alarm. It's arousing. It could be aversive. It is not pleasant. And so a crying baby, crying itself could potentially be arousing. It is not pleasant. And so that personal arousal and distress part of the response is something that I am very interested in and I would like to highlight. So it has implications to parenting, for example. When we have parents who have children who are crying and crying and crying, especially in colicky situations, and we would often expect the parents to be empathic, to respond to the crying baby in a sensitive way, timely way, and appropriate way. And very often we overlook the arousal part, the challenging emotions experienced by the parent. And that part needs to be highlighted, needs to be underscored, and even embraced to an extent that, the more they understand that part of the emotion, the more they probably will be able to regulate that part of the emotion so that they could continue to regulate, to respond to a crying baby in a sensitive and appropriate way. So it's, again, in line with that idea that when we respond to a situation, there are many things that would happen. And there are things that occur at the same time. And it is so important that we look at how these different things are happening in relation to each other and in relation to time. So that's a paradigm that I love, and that's a study that I love to talk about a lot. But that's just one of the studies in the lab. But another important aspect is that we like to look at early experiences, childhood experiences, particularly adverse childhood experiences, and how those experiences would have long-term consequences on mental and physical health outcomes. And that's another important aspect of what we're doing in the lab as well.
Okay. How might students join your lab?
A semester averagely, on average, I like to have about 12 to 13 or so of undergrad students, in addition to maybe 2 or 3 graduate students. But usually we would have more. We used to have a much larger lab, but I realized that I could not pay enough or sufficient attention to each of the students. So I would intentionally, control to make it just that size, so that I would be able to attend to each student's needs better. So it's about, currently I think it's 16 or 17, but it's a little too large. But my goal is like 12 or 13.
I see. So you're not accepting new students to the lab at this time?
Pretty much so. I still had a student who contacted me this week, and I actually last week, and I had her join the lab. But then because we started certain projects, it's difficult for newcomers to catch up. So they can visit the lab, but they can only in the observation, in the position of to observe more than really participate in research projects right now.
Okay. Well, thank you. That was very informative. I appreciate your time.